If anything, it was the United States who asked Israel to join in. And I think here Israel proved itself to be a very dependable, effective ally, more than any allies the U.S. had since 1945 in World War II.
An avalanche of lies are descending upon Israel and the Jewish people. There is a firestorm of hatred and violence against Israel and Jews and the Christians that love them both. And we want to keep equipping you back home to understand how do you fight these lies? How do we find our courage and fight these lies? How do we tell the truth about Israel and about Zion and about Zionism and about Christian Zionism as well? Good evening and welcome to the Rosenberg Report from Jerusalem. Lots to talk about tonight, and we've got a wonderful guest and a dear friend of mine for I think more than 20 years now, maybe even longer than that. Danny Ayalon was the Israeli ambassador to the United States. He was also the deputy foreign minister, and at one point before all that, he was senior foreign policy advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. So Danny Ayalon has an enormous amount of credibility and an amount of experience in diplomacy, in fighting and countering these types of lies. And we're going to talk about some of the biggest lies tonight. These days, he's in investment banking and part of Israel's world of a roaring economy and a very strong shekel. Good evening, Danny. Welcome to the Rosenberg Report. You've been on before, and I'm really glad to have you back.
Thank you so much, Joel. It's so good to be with you, and good job. Continue the great job you do.
I appreciate it. Let's start with one of the biggest, if not the biggest lie that's being weaponized against Israel right now, which is this. Did Israel really commit genocide in Gaza? We've got the South African government has filed a case almost 2 years ago now against us. We've got multiple countries supporting that case, that charging us with genocide while we defend ourselves. And we've got people on the left and the right saying this as though it's just definitively known that that's what's happening. It's not happening, but what's the case? How do we help equip people and Americans generally, Christians in particular, in the United States or elsewhere with the truth about why Israel is not committing genocide in Gaza?
Yeah, Joel, I think it's quite easy for anyone with open hearts and wide eyes. They can understand and see what it is. In Gaza, Hamas, since 2005, when Israel gave the Palestinians Gaza, it was Ariel Sharon, and so I can tell you quite from a personal memory how difficult it was for us to give up Gaza. But we did it only for the sake of peace, with giving a chance to the Palestinians to show the world and to themselves that they can govern effectively in a just system, no corruption and no terror. 20 so years later, we see that the Hamas turned Gaza into a bunker with 3 or 4 levels of tunnels, which would rival even the subway in New York. And they have put all these explosives, and they were attacking Israel with more than 100,000 rockets since we left Gaza. We didn't look to go back into Gaza, but we had no choice if we wanted to survive and to defend our people. So first of all, talking about the numbers. Yes, probably around 70,000 were killed in Gaza, but at least half, 35,000 were terrorists, armed terrorists. And we have to remember that. We did not plant all their bunkers and all their rockets in and around a civil population. This is what the Hamas did. Actually, they committed a double war crimes, because not only they targeted all the rockets at our civilian population, but they planted themselves using their own population as human shields. But look at the comparison. In Fallujah, in Mosul, in Afghanistan, the ratio between civilians and terrorists that were killed was 1 to 7 or 1 to 10 for every terrorist killed by the Americans, by the British, by the French, by the Allied forces. Every terrorist that was killed, at least 7 civilians were killed. And I'm not blaming the Allies, of course, because again, this was the same method of operation that they planted themselves and used the terrorists used themselves, their own population as human shields. In our case, it's about 1 to 1, which is it's unprecedented in the annals of war.
Well, and that's because Israel took a number of extraordinary measures to minimize civilian casualties. In other words, genocide is the intention, legally under the UN Charter. The law about genocide is that the offending force is intending to kill, rape, ethnically cleanse the civilian population. In this case, Israel was going after the terrorist group Hamas, and was taking mitigating efforts, trying to minimize civilian casualties. What were some of the things that Israel did that most militaries don't do to minimize civilian casualties?
Well, first of all, no military would pre-advise where they're going to attack. Israel was calling by cell phones every individual in Gaza that was in an area of peril, telling him, you are surrounded, or there are Hamas terrorists among you. We are going to attack in this place at this time. You know, you're giving all the very valuable intelligence to your enemy just in order to protect lives. Also,
and then encouraging them, all right, we're coming, so you need to leave, and even maps and directions, right, onto where to go to a safe zone where you'll have food and medical supplies and housing and water and so forth.
Exactly. And, and also there was a huge logistical effort to move the population out to safe zones. And this was not a small feat. Mm-hmm. It was
involved moving millions of civilians.
Sure. We put our own soldiers in peril just in this effort, also in the effort of going after Hamas strongholds in a way that would be more surgical than just a random or a carpet bombing. If you look, carpet bombing, Chechnya, or even in Iraq and Afghanistan, this is what is the best, I would say, or the most effective tactics against terrorists. You just erase the entire region. We did not do that, quite the contrary. And there were more than 1,000 Israeli soldiers who died, who were killed in action in Gaza because we wanted so much to spare uninvolved civilian lives.
One of the major attack lines these days is that Israel is really controlling U.S. foreign policy and military policy. And so I wanted to ask you about two different ones. First, that Israel under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has basically pushed U.S. President Donald J. Trump into war in Iran. And this comes from a previous attack line that the United States was pushed or pulled into war in Iraq in 1991, and particularly in 2003 by an Israeli prime minister that you worked for, Ariel Sharon. So let's start with this question first on Trump. Did Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu somehow have some sort of spell or some sort of, this power over Trump to drag him into a war that President Trump neither wanted nor believed was necessary?
Well, this is a very simple answer. No, with a big N. It is preposterous to think that President Trump, and we know that his leadership capacity, would yield to anybody. What Trump did was a out of interest of the United States, and I think he was strongly vindicated by the fact that Iran, in the middle of the war, launched missiles of 4,000 kilometers, which covers the entire region of Europe. And we know that they're planning, and they're not hiding it, planning rockets and ballistic missiles of 10,000 kilometers because they want to reach the United States. It was quite clear Iran, under the Ayatollahs, is a very dangerous country, but not only because they illegal developed their nuclear facilities, they also intended to use it. And the only way to stop Iran from being a threat to the entire world is by taking out their nuclear facilities. And they were given a chance to do it peacefully. They chose not to. So I don't think that Trump had any, other alternative. And if anything, it was the United States who asked Israel to join in. And I think here Israel proved itself to be a very dependable, effective ally, more than any allies the U.S. had since 1945 in World War II.
I appreciate you sharing that, and we certainly haven't seen NATO step up where we are seeing Israel and the United Arab Emirates, I would add also, and Bahrain, really showing to be an ally. When President Trump needed us, we were there. But this isn't a pattern of attack against Israel. This is a pattern of lies that are weaponized against us, that we somehow are, the puppet masters, and whatever American president is in Washington sort of is forced to do what we want them to do. Obviously, President Obama didn't do what Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted, which was, not sign a bad deal. But let's go back to 2003, right? So we're just a year and a half, 2 years after the horrific Al-Qaeda attacks on 9/11 against Washington, against New York City. And President George W. Bush is waging war against terrorists in Afghanistan. And he is actively considering at that point, late 2002, getting into 2003, possibly going to war in Iraq because of then Iraqi President Saddam Hussein's experience with using chemical weapons, even against his own people, and funding and fueling and arming terrorists. And President George W. Bush talked openly about his fear that what if a major state like Iraq had or developed weapons of mass destruction, primarily chemical weapons, I think he was most worried about at the time, and biological, but nuclear as well, and use those against the United States or American allies. Now, the charge has been made by Tucker Carlson, by Candace Owens, Megyn Kelly, and many others, Senator Bernie Sanders on the left, that it was Israel pushing under then Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon to go to war in this regime change war in Iraq. Now, you were the senior foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Sharon. What's the truth about those allegations? Did Sharon want the United States to go to war? Was he pushing for that to happen in Iraq?
Well, here it's very easy because I can give you an answer from a very personal first-hand experience. Because I was foreign policy advisor to Sharon, and then I was ambassador in Washington. So I was smack dab in the middle of communications between the two leaders, Sharon and Bush. And there was not even one time that Sharon even insinuated that the United States should go and attack Iraq. But there was another issue, and the issue was the strategic landscape. Sharon was also thinking of Iran. Iraq was balancing Iran because Iraq and Iran were at the throats of each other, and like sworn enemies after 8 years of war that they had in the 80s. And there was a concern that by eliminating or weakening Iraq, then there is it's not a zero-sum game. You do that, and then Iran will be stronger, and we see the ramification until now.
So one last point on that, then, if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is not only did Israeli Prime Minister Sharon not push George W. Bush into the war in Iraq, he really was doing the opposite. While he didn't say, we won't support you, or absolutely do not do that under any circumstances. He was really advising that that's probably not a good idea to do, which means that the attacks against us today are exactly 180 degrees opposite of what was really happening at the time.
Absolutely. It's you're right on, Joe. Of course, Sharon, as you know, Israel is a really trusted ally. You know, whatever United States decision they take, we are going to support it, whether we agree or not. And this was the case. And again, since I was there, right there, transmitting and giving the messages from Washington to Jerusalem and vice versa, I can tell you very authoritatively that there was nothing, there's nothing further from the truth that Sharon or Israel pushed the United States to start a war in Iraq in 2003.
Would you comment, first of all, we have a few minutes here. Israel has made a really extraordinary appointment of appointing the first ever ambassador, special envoy, they're calling it, to the Christian world. Every Israeli ambassador needs to have the Christian community in their countries that they're focused on, to some degree. But nobody had up until now, this is their portfolio. And I've been advocating this for, I think, about 7 years now, since I wrote a piece in the Jerusalem Post about it. But Ambassador George Deek, who himself is an Israeli Christian, has just been appointed. He was just on the Rosenberg Report. What is your take as a very seasoned Israeli diplomat? First of all, why did we never have such an ambassador? And what's the importance of having one now?
Okay, I'll tell you, we didn't have one specifically because the relationship were so natural and so good and growing. But now, unfortunately, this relationship is being attacked by anti-Semites, by revisionists, by replacement theories. This is why it is very important to us, first of all, to signal to the Christian world, we are one, and we attach great importance and respect to you, to the level that we appoint a designated ambassador to be our voice to you and your voice to the government of Israel. I don't think there is any substitute to this very long relationship and very strong relationship between the Christian community, especially in the United States, but not only in the United States, and Israel. Because not only this is our faith and future and keeping our spirit and value, this is also an existential issue, a threat. If you look at the map of the Middle East, you see the vast Muslim world. Many of the Muslims today are quite extreme radicals. I'm not accusing everyone, but many of them are, and we see how they behave and what also they're teaching. They're teaching actually to take over the West. But there is one little country that actually prevents them from taking the West, first Europe and then the United States, and this is Israel. Israel is right there in the middle, very small, but very strong, and we are like a lightning rod, concentrate all their attacks on us, and thank God, and with the help of God, we can not only survive, but we thrive. But certainly, we need this friendship. This is a very important alliance between Israel and the Christians worldwide.